Hello everyone, my name is Jocelyn and we have a lot to go through today because this is the video about the Supreme Court ruling that states that the definition of a woman is linked to biological sex, and I've got some things to say about that. So apparently in my country it's now okay for some old out-of-touch people with silly unearned titles to just start defining words like they're not qualified to do. I just love this country. And the fact that this was a unanimous decision as well really is the twist of the knife. So, there's a few videos about this of people having their own reactions and thoughts about this, and I encourage you to go see those videos as well. The ones that I haven't seen yet, I will go see after I make this, but I wanted to be as not influenced by them as possible. Problem number one I ran across when making this video was the almost overwhelming amount of articles and news reports on this topic. Oh dear, that sounds a bit like I'm going to start going into a sponsored segment for Ground News. Don't worry, I'm not sponsored. That's not what's going to happen here, okay? Don't click away. The problem I face is the heavy transphobic bias in the British media. Okay, Al Jazeera, although I do have criticisms and comments to make about this article, I won't be reading the whole thing for brevity, but we'll pick out the most important parts. Just to clarify what we're talking about here. Trans women aren't legally women, what the UK Supreme Court ruling means. Oh God. I mean, I know you need a catchy title, but The ruling concluded a long-running dispute between feminist advocacy groups and the Scottish government. I really dislike the way that this is written. Whenever the word feminist pops up, it should have heavy quotation marks around it, because this is not real feminism. This is not wanting equality for people of all genders. This is transphobia wrapped up in nice sounding language. So the United Kingdom Supreme Court has ruled that the terms woman and sex refer to a biological woman and biological sex under UK equality laws, bringing a long-running court battle between feminist groups and the Government of Scotland to an end. Wednesday's ruling is expected to have far-reaching consequences for policies on whether and how spaces and services reserved for women should be extended to include trans women. Those born male, again language, who have transitioned socially or medically, or who identify as women, such as changing rooms, domestic violence shelters and medical services. Okay, that's the essential crux of what this whole issue is going to be about. Again, could we not just use the terms assigned male at birth? People who are assigned male at birth, because not all trans women are biologically male. Some actually have changed their biology so that they are now biologically female, or at least closer aligned to female with more female traits than male traits. And hell, even some people are born with a mix of male and female traits. We call these people intersex, and they have been completely and utterly ignored by the court ruling. Again, love that. The legal dispute began in March 2018 when the Scottish Parliament passed an act stating that 50% of non-executive members of the boards of Scottish public bodies must be women. That's it. That's how this whole thing started, and now it's suddenly grown into a witch hunt about who goes into which bathroom. A sticking point in the policy, however, was the definition of woman. The Act itself said that women included transgender women who held gender recognition certificates. That is, trans women who have legally transitioned and are certified by the government as having changed their gender. A so-called feminist group, For Women Scotland, challenged the new law and launched a petition against it in 2018. The group argued that the Scottish Parliament had wrongfully defined woman and that the law had failed to use legal definitions as set out in the UK Equality Act of 2010, which isn't even true. This original bill absolutely used the correct legal definition of the word woman. They just don't like that. They just don't like that trans women are legally categorised as women, or at least they were until about 4 days ago. That act prohibits discrimination based on age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership in cases of employment, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. However, the UK Equality Act 2010 does allow for separate or single-sex services to be provided when this is reasonably necessary, such as for reasons of privacy, decency or preventing trauma. Oh fuck it, I'll tell you now. There are already new rules being implemented by police forces that now seek to strip search trans women, even the ones who have fully transitioned, by male officers. And I'm sorry, what happened to the privacy, decency and preventing trauma of those women? Now look, let's take a moment to talk about the Equality Act of 2010, because I have actually read it, some time ago, and I went back to it, to the relevant parts. It is full of legal jargon, but essentially it says that person A cannot legally mistreat person B unfavourably on grounds of these protected characteristics, 2 of which are sex and sex/gender reassignment. And the parts that mention those definitions are super vague. Now, this argument isn't newly framed as women's rights versus trans rights. It's a continuation of that. And there is no good reason for this combative framing. Both women's rights and trans rights should be protected and can exist. They are not mutually exclusive. Let's say, for the sake of example, a trans man is discriminated against. Some trans men of note that I would like to use as examples might look like this. I'm using these men as an example because they are already openly, publicly trans. They are YouTubers, they are authors, I'm not outing anybody by using their faces, their images as examples. Let's say, for the sake of example, that they are discriminated against because of being trans, because of their gender. If that happens, then it would be because they're trans. It's not because of their biology being perceived as female or whatever. That being said, what the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom has effectively done is prioritise this faux feminism over not just trans rights, but all human rights. In March 2024, the advocacy group, backed by other feminist organisations, and lesbian groups. Who are these lesbians? Who are they? Because statistically, more lesbians are on the side of trans people than not. Appealed to the Supreme Court. The group was also supported by Harry Potter author and women's rights campaigner, no, anti-trans campaigner. Let's get that completely clear. Let's check out your bias, Al Jazeera. Okay. J.K. Rowling, who reportedly donated £70,000 to a crowdfunding campaign by FWS. This ruling was not fair or even or equal in any way, shape or form. This was bought and paid for by J.K. Turfling herself. And it gets even worse than that, because how many trans voices, how many trans people, how many people from our side of the debate did they listen to? Give you a few seconds to work that one out. Oh yeah. Zero. And it wasn't even 24 hours after this ruling that we saw photos of the bitch herself celebrating from her super yacht in the Bahamas. This woman has more money than God. She likes to pretend that she is fighting for a good cause, for, you know, the rights of people, blah, blah, blah. And this is what she chooses to do with that money. Fuel hatred. Fund hatred. There's literally, count how many fucking genocides there are going on in the world right now, and this is what she chooses to spend her money on. On Wednesday, 5 judges ruled unanimously that the term woman in the existing UK Equality Act should be interpreted as only people born biologically female, and that trans women, even those with GRCs, should be excluded from that definition. Well, I also want to say that this is really stupid, because this ruling conflates gendered terminology, like woman, with biological terminology, like female, and conflating the gender and the biological sex together muddies the waters of definition instead of clarifying them. Because for how long has it been now that we, the trans people, and the trans advocates, and the sociologists and psychologists that deal with this gender studies, who again were not listened to, we've been saying that biological sex and gender identity are not the same thing. They are related things. They are related concepts. But they are not the same things. And the wording in this ruling is very much ignoring any of that research that's from the past 100 years. As well as ignoring intersex people and non-binary people such as myself. And it leaves trans women who would need certain services vulnerable. This is not protecting human rights. This is going against the Equality Act itself. You know, what about the rights of the people who have transed their genders? That is the Supreme Court of the UK treating us unfavourably. Person A is treating person B unfavourably. That is against the frickin' policy of the Equality Act. Do you see why people were mad? Do you see why people were protesting in the streets? The court added that the ruling was not a triumph of one side over the other, and emphasised that transgender people are still protected from discrimination under UK law. However, some protections, the judges clarified, should only apply to biological females and not transgender women. Not a triumph. Did you see all the celebrations of the TERFs outside the courthouse, popping their bottles of wine and champagne? They were celebrating this. Other notable, sort of publicly visible TERFs, such as Maya Forstater and Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, also expressed their messages of delight at trans people losing their legal protections. And I want to say that it is not all doom and gloom from the perspective of people who are in the public eye. Nicola Coughlan, little superstar that she is, we want to give her some flowers here, has voiced her support for trans and non-binary people following the UK Supreme Court's ruling to exclude transgender women from the definition of woman. In a video posted on Instagram, the 38-year-old, 38, she's 38 and she looks like that. My goodness, what is she doing right? Oh yeah, that's it. It's not smoking cigars on a super yacht and being a hateful bigot. That's what she's doing right. In her video, Nicola continued, "To see people celebrate it is more stomach-churning and disgusting." In response, she's starting a fundraiser for Not a Phase, a trans-led nationwide charity committed to improving the lives of transgender adults, adding that she will match any donation up to £10,000. "Now's the time to speak up and make your voice heard," she continued. "Let your trans, non-binary friends and the community at large know that you're there for them and we'll keep fighting for them." She further appealed to allies of the transgender community, writing in her caption, "Allies of the trans and non-binary community, time to come together. Fuck the Supreme Court, fuck the TERFs, let's raise some money." Back to the article. Until now, trans women with GRCs could be counted as women for the purposes of all women shortlists for political parties or to fill quotas for women on boards or within organisations. This will no longer be the case. In the 20 years since the Gender Recognition Act was passed in the UK, nearly 8,500 GRCs have been issued. What? In 20 years, nearly 8,500 GRCs have been issued. Now, of course, that doesn't apply to all trans people because not all trans people have GRCs. I don't have one. I never sought one out. But if things were as terrible as what the TERFs would have you believe, 8,500 in a population of that the size of the UK is nothing. Is such a tiny number. It's such a tiny percent of nothing. These people are freaking out about trans people, and we don't even make up 1% of the population. That is insane. How much they have managed to vilify and scapegoat us and hurt our reputation in society when we are such a tiny fraction of people is insane. The ruling provides some clarification on an issue that has proved polarising not only in the UK but also in the United States, and we will come to that later. Debates have raged in both countries, as well as in other Western nations, on whether certain women's rights, services or spaces should be extended to trans women. US President Donald Fart is facing legal challenges for signing orders to define sex as only male or female. Again, we'll get to that. Trump has also tried to ban transgender people from entering the military for a second time, might I point out. He already did that once, the first time he was president. Let's not forget that. And block trans people from participating in sports teams that do not align with their biological sex. Again, Al Jazeera, seriously, cut out the bullshit. Yours was the most neutral article I could find, and it is still riddled with transphobic language. Groups like FWS argue that biological sex cannot be changed and that the rights of transgender people should not come at the expense of women. Allowing trans women to be included in the definition of woman would reduce protection for people born female, they argue. I don't know how they even make that argument, because that's absolutely not true. Trans women still want women's rights. We still, again, I say we because I'm trans femme, we still want to be treated with decency and humanity as people. There is no trans supremacy going on. There's no like, if we get rights, then suddenly you don't get rights and we take them away. That doesn't happen. That's not a thing. That's not a part of any agenda anywhere. And yes, biological sex can in fact be changed over time. These are the people that are denying the biological reality around them. They just don't like it. They just don't like the fact that trans people exist because they find us icky or whatever. Fine, cool. You can find us icky. You can stay over there in your little hate-filled group and say trans people and the big bad, boo-hoo, all you want to. But when you start affecting laws that affect us, then we're gonna punch a turf. You know, it's self-defense at that point. Previously, FWS Director Treba Budge argued that the Scottish Act at the root of the legal case could be interpreted to mean that public boards could legally consist of, quote, 50% men and 50% men with certificates, referring to trans women holding GRCs, therefore excluding biological women altogether. Again, trans women, not biological male, because a lot of us transition to align our biology with that of females, okay? Second thing, calling trans women men with certificates is disingenuous and obvious misgendering and just hateful bigotry anyway. And, this is a made-up scenario. It's stupidly unlikely. These people have nothing better to do than fabricate problems to fuss about. The framing is very disingenuous and dishonest. It is very, very unlikely that a board would even reach like 1 or 2% transgender participants, let alone 50%. Because there are so few of us in the population. This is a made-up problem. On the other hand, trans rights groups say they require the same protections as women, which we do, because women's rights are human rights, trans rights are human rights. Okay. The ruling on Wednesday excludes transgender people from sex discrimination protections and conflicts with human rights laws, they say. Yeah, because it does. It conflicts with the Equality Act itself. The Supreme Court's decision would also undermine protection for trans people covered in the UK's 2004 Gender Recognition Act. Opponents said the law allows trans people to obtain GRC and update the sex recorded on their birth certificate accordingly, but trans groups say that recognition could now be undermined. It absolutely has been undermined by this ruling. Some believe the ruling will lead to more attacks on trans people. Rights and hate monitoring groups note that the average trans person is more likely than others to face discrimination and physical, sexual, or verbal harassment. Which it absolutely will. Transphobes will be more incensed to hate on us. Just as racists and xenophobes were more incensed to hate on immigrants just after the Brexit referendum results were announced. These sorts of big public displays do galvanise the worst of the worst kinds of people. Stop Hate UK, which monitors attacks on minority groups in the country, reports that the UK police recorded 2,630 hate crimes against transgender people in 2021. The group said that was a 16% increase from the previous year, and that it was likely an undercount as most trans people do not feel safe enough to report attacks. What with this new rule about the police strip searching trans women who have fully transitioned by male officers, yeah, I think that there will be even more of a reason to not want to report trans-specific hate crime to the police now. Hey, I'm editing, and I just want to make a quick clarification that no, I do not think that victims of crimes get strip searched. I just want to point out that this new rule is not the sort of behaviour that engenders trust for trans people in police force. But then that was the whole point of this exercise in the first place, to strip us of protections. Everyone knows what sex is and you can't change it, Susan Smith, who co-directs FWS, told the Associated Press news agency. It's common sense, basic common sense, and the fact that we have been down a rabbit hole where people have tried to deny science and to deny reality, and hopefully this will now see us back to reality. We are delighted, Sex Matters, another group involved in the court case, said in a statement on Wednesday. The court has given us the right answer. The protected characteristic of sex, male and female, refers to reality, not to paperwork, the statement read. That paperwork was supposed to reflect the reality of the lived experiences of trans people. And biology is not as basic or as common sense as these fuckheads would like to believe. It's evil. It is actually evil. The way these people have vilified us, the way that this gender critical ideology has proliferated, not just amongst the hate groups, but also it's now trickled up to the Supreme Court and the legal legislation and everything that we have to deal with. I noticed that there were not one but two groups represented at that court case. And maybe even more. But they were anti-trans groups. What happened to nothing about us without us? Where the hell were our voices? We are really shocked by today's Supreme Court decision, which reverses 20 years of understanding on how the law recognises trans men and women with gender recognition certificates, Scottish Trans said in a statement. The group also accused the court of hearing only from organisations on one side of the debate and not from trans people. We think their judgment reflects the fact that trans people's voices were missing, the statement read. Absolutely. Maggie Chapman, a legislator of Scotland's Green Party, which has been at the forefront of championing trans rights, said the ruling was deeply concerning for human rights and a huge blow to some of the most marginalised people in our society. Which, yeah, that's because it is. At least the Scottish Green Party has recognised that. And while all of this is deeply disappointing, it is hardly surprising. Great Britain is called Turf Island for a reason. This comes pretty much fully in the wake of what happened a few months ago when Wes Streeting, the Minister for Health and Social Care, announced a ban on puberty blockers for all minors. Wes Streeting has been accused of causing distress and uncertainty to trans people and failing to provide clear information on the puberty blockers trial, which is understood to be starting soon. Puberty blockers were banned indefinitely in the UK for under 18s in December after the CAS review found there was insufficient evidence to show they were safe. It recommended a clinical trial to determine the effectiveness and safety of the medication. It is understood that the Department for Health and Social Care expects the trial to begin within the next few weeks and conclude in 2028. But NHS sources told The Independent they are not expecting to publish any details about the trial until February, just 1 month before it is set to begin, leaving young people wanting to access the medication guessing if they will be part of the trial. Ms. Tammy Hymas, Head of Communications and Advocacy at the charity Mermaids, good people, told The Independent that young people deserve access to the healthcare they need to be their authentic self without being compelled to take part in research or having to wait for years for an appointment. With puberty blockers outside the NHS now banned and a waiting list in excess of 5 years, families and young people have been left with no safe, accessible or affordable options. The severe delays and complete absence of details for the proposed research trial that would give some young people access to puberty blockers has left trans youth feeling abandoned by the NHS. We need a health service that listens to young people's needs and supports them regardless of their background or gender. A Stonewall spokesperson said the decision to restrict access to puberty blockers risks undermining trust in the healthcare system and their ability to access the support they need. The lack of information about the proposed NHS trial on puberty blockers has already caused distress and uncertainty to trans people and their loved ones, the spokesperson added. Essentially what that means is you can't take puberty blockers unless you are part of this trial, because puberty blockers have been banned both within and without the NHS. But also, the trial details were not forthcoming or clear, and lots of transgender questioning youth without access to the puberty blockers that they wanted are just left wondering and guessing about their futures. A DHSC spokesperson said, for years puberty blockers were given to vulnerable young children. Vulnerable young children? Won't somebody please think of the children? Without proof that they were safe or effective, or the rigorous safeguards of a clinical trial. This is shameful, and we won't apologise for putting children's safety first. Apart from, the trans children who are actually begging to be on the trials. NHS England is working to establish a carefully controlled trial into puberty blockers, the first of its kind the world over, and will set out our next steps shortly. The NHS is reforming gender identity services to ensure safe, evidence-based care for young people and has extended support to anyone affected or concerned by the banning order. Except that's not actually true, because all the evidence that we have so far says that puberty blockers are completely safe and recommended for trans youth and for gender questioning youth who need to take the time to decide which direction their body would like to be, They just need the time to make the decision for what is right for themselves. And a lot of adult trans people who missed out on the opportunity for puberty blockers would have really appreciated the chance at the time, had they been available. And the fact that this is coming from Wes Streeting, who is a Labour MP, who is a gay man, who is following the recommendations of the Cass report, which has been widely discredited already. Essentially what I'm saying is, he don't speak for us. He's not a part of this conversation. Again, it's disappointing, but it's not surprising, and it is in fact a bit of a stab in the back. And all this is to say that it feels like the UK is following in the footsteps of the USA since the beginning of Trump's second presidential term. Why did you do that to us, America? Why did you do that to the world? Why? Things like this. The executive order called Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. If that isn't some 1984 kind of bullshit wording, I don't know what is. This has also affected gender and sex markers in passports. Under the executive order, we will no longer issue US passports or consular reports of birth abroad with an X marker. The gender X marker has now been removed from US passport options, and we will only issue passports with an M or F sex marker that match the customer's biological sex at birth. Great. And if the doctor makes a mistake, then too bad. And recently there was the mass firing of LGBT plus intel officers. Gabbard says more than 100 intelligence officers fired for chat messages. Apparently these discussions were sexual themed and therefore deemed inappropriate, but what it actually was just trans people talking about transition stuff. Again, more demonization. Just what we need right now. This isn't about doing what's right. These decisions have not been made based on doing what's right. Trump ignores laws and legal proceedings every day. So I advise that no one follow his rules. Because if he's not going to follow them, why should you? And for that matter, I am going to blatantly and flagrantly disregard the ruling of the UK Supreme Court. So the conclusion to all of this, I believe, is that while trans people do have a different kind of relationship with our gender than cis people, for the sake of my own experience, I will talk in terms that I know. The womanhood of a trans woman is not one that's bestowed by birth. It's one that's earned through grace and grit and mascara. And stripping trans women of that womanhood is transphobia. Of course, the same thing applies for trans men, and whatever the equivalent is for trans masculinity, I guess, you know, the same grit and also proving oneself, but also learning to shave. I'm trying to make a little bit of light out of the situation because, let's face it, that's how we cope with this. I cannot present a topic like this with serious, because, oh my God, you would disengage and I certainly would as well. But I've got to say that the amount of hardship it takes to live our lives and our authentic identities is not just a piece of paper, a form to be filled in. That legal document is just a representation of years of personal growth and defying convention and transitioning socially, medically, you know, whatever, struggling against systems that oppress and misunderstand us, all for this to be told by those who don't care to understand us and didn't listen to us who we are? Fuck no. And the people, the protesters who gathered in London just a few days ago to stand up and say, we are counted, we matter, we are not happy with this decision that you have made, are living proof of that. And I've always lived by the attitude that I don't need no piece of paper to tell me who I know myself to be. And I'm absolutely certain that's the same thing for every trans person who has a GRC. The only difference is they sought out that legal document because it is the representation of those things, because it's was for them a necessary means to afford and protect their rights and dignity until now. So now it is time to stand together in these truly trying times and or seriously think about moving to Ireland. Trans men are men, no matter what they say. Trans women are women, no matter what they say. Trans rights are human rights, no matter what they say. And non-binary folks, we are who we say we are. And we are valid, goddammit.